Welcome back, everyone. RacerX here, and today I'm down in Tampa, Florida, visiting a couple of my favorite dealerships. Right across the street, back over there, is my Dodge dealership. That is courtesy Dodge Jeep Chrysler Ram in Tampa. That's where I got my Demon. Great guys to work with over there. And today I thought I would gather up one of their small SUVs and compare it to something over here at this store, the Toyota store. These are both classic dealerships, so they're in the same kind of family of dealerships. But I want to compare two different SUVs today. One of them is the best-selling SUV on the market. The other is the worst-selling SUV on the market. And I wanted to find out what the true differences were between the two.
T-minus 15 seconds.
Directly behind me are the two cars that I wanted to compare for you today. This is a 2024 Hornet GT, and this is a 2024 Toyota Rav4. This is actually one of the worst selling small SUVs on the planet, which is really weird because when you compare it to the Toyota, they actually are really comparable. The Toyota Rav4 is one of the top selling small SUVs in the world, and the sales numbers are absolutely polar opposites. It is really strange. I want to take a closer look at both of these because it begs a really interesting question. One of the things that I find really strange is the fact that the Hornet seems to get all sorts of hate online. It actually is a pretty good looking car when you compare it right next to the RaV4, which, as I mentioned, is one of the best selling SUVs on the planet. It actually looks a little bit sportier. It's a slightly smaller car, slightly shorter. It weighs a little bit less than the RaV4, but for some reason this is a really beloved car by a lot of people, and the Hornet is a really hated car by some people. And when you talk about base price, they both base out right around $32,000 for the bone stock base car. Now, both of these cars are kind of one trim level up. The Hornet actually has the black top package on it and the track package, giving it a little bit nicer wheel setup, a little nicer caliper setup on there. And of course, this RaV4 is an XLE versus the LE, so it has a few other little things on it. You can see the wheels right there on the car. But when you really look at the two cars, I feel like the Hornet is actually the better looking of the two cars. Here's a quick look at the wheels side by side. On the Hornet, because it is a track pack car, you do get the 20-inch wheels, 235 on the tires. Right over here, you get 225 on the tires, a 17-inch wheel, a little bit more of a basic wheel setup on the RaV4. I actually think the Hornet actually has a much better looking wheel setup. Not everybody cares about the wheels, but I thought I would point that out. As many of you are well aware, because you watch my channel, you realize I am a performance enthusiast. So I like something that's fun and fast. And when you're comparing small SUVs, I realize they kind of don't go hand in hand. But when you look at the power numbers on these two cars, like I said, they're right about the exact same price. It is glaring, the performance difference between the two. The Toyota Rav4 has a naturally aspirated four-cylinder producing 203 horsepower and 184 pound-feet of torque, which is still competitive for a vehicle in this segment. When you talk about the Hornet GT, the performance goes way, way up. That is the Hurricane 4. It is a 2-liter turbo four-cylinder producing 268 horsepower and 295 pound-feet of torque. Over 110 more pound-feet of torque in this little Hornet, even though it's lighter compared to the RaV4. So performance-wise, it's not even close between these two cars. One other little item of note, and yes, it is a very small thing, but I did notice it. The RaV4 has the old school hood strut right there. And when you look at the Hornet, of course, it has the gas struts. So one little bitty thing. Of course, you do still see the leaves from it sitting under a tree because this car has been on the lot significantly longer. These cars, they cannot keep them on the lot. It's really weird. Now, the RaV4, being that it is a slightly larger SUV, it's got a fair amount of room back here in the trunk. Now, when you compare it over here to the Hornet GT, it is a much smaller space in the back of this. It's a lot more narrow, and you just don't have nearly as much room to work in this. So yeah, you do feel that this vehicle is smaller when you compare it to the Toyota. Also, on the Hornet, I have to manually close the trunk, which I will go ahead and do. On the Toyota, you can just press the handy dandy little button up here and it will go ahead and close itself. So advantage Toyota there. Here's the interior of the 2024 Dodge Hornet GT, and it is a pretty nice place to sit and do business. You can see this long infotainment screen right here in the middle. I really like that red stitching there with the black. It really provides a nice contrast. The steering wheel is actually quite nice. You can see flat bottom steering wheel. You've got your sport button right here. Really nice digital display. You've got your electronic parking brake right here. Everything's pretty easy to find. Vents are relatively easy to control right there in the middle. And I really like the seats in this car. You can see kind of that black and red theme right there, kind of an Alcantara type feel. Really sporty interior inside of this Hornet. And it is a nice place to sit and do business. I want to compare it to the RaV4 over there. And here is the interior of the 2024 Toyota Rav4 XLE. You can see the digital display. It's digital in the middle with analog bits on the outside. Nice steering wheel. It feels a little more basic in this car to me. You can see the white stitching there. The vents are located just a little bit higher on the dash. Nice infotainment screen here. It's not quite as long, but a little bit taller, but certainly very functional. Right over here, you do have a wireless charger right there. Feels a lot like the Hornet, like right here in terms of how you put the car in gear, all that good stuff. You can see the seats on this model are cloth, but it is a roomy car. There's a little more room in this one than the Hornet, but it is a nice place to sit and do business. I wouldn't say it's quite as sporty feeling as the inside of the Hornet, but it is a nice interior. I am now aboard the 2024 Toyota RaV4, and it is a nice place to sit in this vehicle. It feels a little bit basic to me. I know that you can kind of go up one trim level for a few $1,000s and kind of get the leather seats in this. Very similar to like what you would have over there in the Hornet. As I mentioned, these two cars are basically right about the same price. I'm looking at the infotainment screen right here, and it actually has a really nice picture on it. You can do a lot with this. From a functionality perspective, the RaV4 is really good. As I mentioned, it's a little bit bigger than the Hornet. And here's the thing. Toyota is not necessarily known as being like a performance brand. Yes, they have the Supra and they've had some other cool stuff in the past, but they're not really the big performance brand that I would consider Dodge to be. They're really known for reliability, fuel economy, value, all that sort of stuff. And they sell a zillion of these. I mean, as soon as these RaV4s hit the lot, bang, they're out the door. Where you have the Hornet, and it's like some crazy supply. I mean, they sell almost none of the Hornet. And I have driven the Hornet several times now, and I think it's a really solid car. So it's just a really weird thing to me. I'm going to go ahead and take this RaV4 down the road and see how it drives. But I will say the interior feels slightly more basic to me in the RaV4 than it does in the Hornet. After driving this car for only a few minutes, I will admit the ride on this car is pretty good. I mean, it feels like a pretty solid little car. I don't feel like it's really lacking anything. It might be slightly underpowered. That's not really what this car is meant to do. I mean, this truly is a soccer mom type car for the masses that's relatively inexpensive. It has a little more room in it than the Hornet does. It's very competitive in the class. And, you know, to this consumer, they're not really looking for performance for the most part. And that is the truth of the matter, right? The Hornet kind of hits a little bit of a different segment. The Dodge customer is not quite the same thing, but I will say, I mean, the RaV4, it feels just fine. I mean, it feels pretty basic to me, but it definitely gets a job done. Fair amount of room in the back, fair amount of room in the back seats. It's just a solid offering. One other little thing that's pretty cool about this is you've got the drive modes kind of right down here in the center section. And if I push Eco, the center section glows green. If I go normal, it goes back to white. And then if I go to sport, everything turns red. And I do actually really like that little feature. So I'm cruising along about 35 miles an hour. I'm just gonna go ahead and give it a little bit here. Okay, come on. Let's go. All right, well, it's not terribly impressive from a performance perspective, but you have to remember that's not really what this car is meant to be. I mean, that's the truth of it. Like I said, this is more of a soccer mom mobile. Most of the people that are going to buy a car like this, they want value. They want a car that's going to check off a fair amount of boxes, something that's going to be really reliable moving forward. And in the RaV4, that's what you get. You're not going to get a ton of crazy stuff with this car, but it does a lot of things. It does it fairly well. It's pretty simple. This car just kind of is what it is. I mean, it's a good, solid car. I am now aboard the 2024 Hornet GT, and it is really glaring when you go from the RaV4 to sitting in this. It feels much sportier in this. The dash is a little curvier. The seats hug around you a little bit more. interior wise, this car just feels significantly more sporty than the RaV4. Now, I do realize it doesn't typically feel like a Dodge. Like, a lot of people are used to sitting in Dodges. That's not what this feels like. We all know that this is basically an Alfa Romeo Tonale that's been rebadged to be a Dodge. But that doesn't take anything away from how sporty it feels. It doesn't feel quite as roomy as the RaV4. The window sills sit just a little bit higher, but it does feel really nice, and I really like this all-digital display that it has here. I want to go ahead and just take it down the road really quick, and I want to give you my final thoughts. One of the major complaints people seem to have about the Hornet, or at least that perception is out there, that the car is not competitively priced. But I would beg to differ. I mean, when you compare this thing to the RaV4 trim for trim, it's right there. And when you compare it to, say, anything from Nissan or Mazda, Chevy, whoever, there are a litany of other small SUVs out there. The GT trim in the Hornet is actually very competitively priced, and it's faster than all of them. Now, when you jump up to the RT, which is slightly faster than this GT trim, the price seems to go way up. I've seen those things trimmed out to like $55,000. And at that price point, it is no longer really competitive in the segment. So there is that rub on it. But the GT trim, I actually really like. And they say the RT trim is actually faster than this, but when you drive it around, I really like this little Hurricane 4. The performance is like night and day comparing this thing to that RaV4. This feels like a much faster, more capable vehicle, and for a performance enthusiast, I like that. So the truth is, the Hornet is much sportier and much, much faster than the RaV4. I mean, I'm just going down a little stretch right here, just giving it a little bit of gas, a little more. Here comes the turbo, and we are off. This feels like so much more than 300 horsepower in this. And it is night and day comparison when you talk about performance between the RaV4 and the Hornet. This is just a better performing car all around. I love the sporty feel of this. And it's really interesting to me, like when I look at the internet, I realize the internet is what it is. And there's so many people that bash on the Hornet, calling it just an absolute piece of trash, garbage. These people have never even driven it, and they're just like, trash and garbage, which is really weird. Now, I realize the average Dodge guy, the performance enthusiast, right? The person that loves the tire shredding, loud cars, you know, all that kind of stuff. This vehicle will not appeal to you. That's not what this is. It's going after a completely different part of the segment, part of the market segment. So you have to kind of take that into account. This is not a muscle car. I hate that they branded this as part of the Brotherhood of Muscle.
A new arrival alarms the Brotherhood of Muscle. These dominant beasts race to assess the threat. Friend or foe, the Brotherhood sees something else. Themselves.
Because it has really nothing to do with muscle. But it doesn't take away from this being a pretty nice little car to drive. One of the things that I do find just a little bit aggravating, and I've seen all the comments online, people saying, oh, well, look, RacerX is just a simp for Dodge because he doesn't just drag the Hornet through the mud and trash it every chance he gets. He doesn't spread tons of hate about the Hornet, and he actually talks positively about it, which means he lost credibility with me, and all he should do is trash that car, what a piece of crap. This is coming from people who literally have never driven the car. And no, this is not a muscle car. I've said that so many times in the past. I mean, it doesn't have a big engine. It's not a crazy amount of power. It's relatively quiet. I mean, it's not a muscle car. And the fact that Dodge tried to brand this as a muscle car, in my mind, is not really ideal. This is not part of the Brotherhood of Muscle. But when you compare this to other cars in the segment, okay, like cars, especially the GT trim, I feel like it compares relatively favorably. I mean, it's one of the fastest cars in the segment. Like I said, I don't necessarily feel like the RT competes that well, but this GT trim, as long as it doesn't have a crazy amount of bells and whistles on it, it's actually really nice. It's pretty darn quick. It makes that RaV4 seem unbelievably slow. It feels much sportier, and I actually really do like the Hornet. Now, here is the elephant in the room, and I do need to tackle this. When you talk about the consumer that actually wants a small SUV, okay, keep in mind, I'm always looking at performance numbers, right? And I feel like this is just a better car than the RaV4, but people that want to buy a small SUV don't really care about performance. That's not the customer that's going to buy these types of cars. They're looking for reliability, price point, which I said, price point, we're kind of right there, but when you think about Dodge, you don't always think about reliability, right? When people think about Toyota, that's exactly what they think about. They're like, well, if I buy this car, it could go 300, 400, 500,000 miles and it's going to last me forever. And, you know, they don't necessarily care that it's much faster in a straight line. They just want something that checks off all the boxes, that is going to last forever, that's going to, you know, have good crash test ratings and all the reliable, sensible things, the non-performance enthusiasts, the 98% of the other people out there that buy cars, that's what they want. So that's why they're going to go out and spend the money on the Toyota rather than the Dodge. And that is a really hard ship to write, so to speak, right? I mean, in order to, you know, to have the Hornet be one of those cars that people think about when they think about reliability, the car's going to have to be out there for a long time. It's going to have really good reliability reviews. And right now there's a lot of unknowns with this car. That doesn't mean it's a piece of crap. Like I said, I like driving the car around. It's just they're fighting an uphill battle in that segment. Okay, your muscle car guys aren't going to like this, and the sensible people that want this car, they want the Toyotas. You know, they want the cars, you know, the Nissans and the cars out there that just they know are going to last forever. A lot of the Japanese type cars like that, that's what they're going to want to buy, and they'll spend that amount of money on the Toyota. You go across to the Toyota store, it is packed. Go into the Dodge store, hardly anybody wants to look at the Hornets. That's why these cars have been sitting around. What it all boils down to is the Hornet sells really slowly because it's got a bit of an identity crisis. It doesn't really fit in with the rest of the stuff in the Dodge lineup. It's going after a segment that they're not really known for. And, you know, when you're competing in the reliability segment, that is an uphill battle, and it's just going to be a hard one to win. Like I said, they've got 2.9 financing on the Hornet right now, so it's a great car to go look at. Definitely drive a bunch of these if you're considering like a small SUV for like a little daily. I would highly recommend at least driving this because it is a nice car. Well, guys, that is about it for this one. A huge shout out to Courtesy Dodge and Courtesy Toyota for letting me borrow these two cars to compare them for you. It is really strange to me that the Hornet sells so poorly when it compares so favorably to the RaV4, at least in my opinion. I mean, you get a lot more performance, it's sportier. There are a lot of things that the Hornet does well, yet only a fraction of these are sold compared to the RaV4. Like I said, I really do believe it's just the consumer and just public perception of the cars in terms of why they sell the way they do. Let me know what you guys think. Would you take a Hornet over a RaV4? Let me know in the comments down below, and I will catch you on the next one. So until then, RacerX.
Just gonna step on it here. It goes. I mean, it really legitimately goes. It's like a quick vehicle. It feels quick. And so that's the new 2024 Dodge Hornet, Dodge's new compact crossover. There's a lot to like here, and it certainly has some unique traits compared to the usual little SUV, which puts the Dodge Hornet here against some rivals. The Hornet is great, actually.